Hi everyone, this is Jerome Nolvan, founder of GGV Publishing and your host for the GGV Publishing podcast. This episode is very special. Today we are going to talk about the 10 most important books to read in economics, specifically in economics theory. Economics theory is very important because you cannot practice without a theory. You need to have a fundamental understanding of the things you want to practice. So let me first say that this list is not exhaustive. There are thousands of books that have been written in the field of economics. Economics is a very vast academic discipline with a lot of subjects in many fields within the realm of economics. So the list that I created, sure, it is subjective, but I've tried to be as nuanced as possible. So for those who will watch this episode, you may not see your favorite book appearing in the list, and that's okay. That's why I want you to leave in the comments what books would you include in this list instead of the ones that I've included. That being said, let's start with number 10, The Distribution of Wealth by John Bates Clark. So, The Distribution of Wealth, a theory of wages, interest, and profit, is a book of economic theory written by John Bates Clark, a neoclassical economist of the 19th century. And the book was published in 1899. In this seminal book, Clark presents his theory of marginal productivity, which explains how the value of goods is determined, how wages, profits, and interest rates are established in a market economy. The marginal productivity theory states that under perfect competition, the price of each factor of production will be equal to its marginal productivity. The price of the factor is thus determined by the industry, and the firm will employ that number of a given factor at which price is equal to its marginal productivity. So Clark's main thesis in the book is that wealth is distributed according to the value that each economic agent brings to the performance of the firm or business he works for. This means that the distribution of wealth is based on a system of competition where each individual is rewarded according to the value he adds to the total output produced. So that's very important because the distribution of wealth is a topic that always comes up during election cycle, and this book pretty much explains the fundamental of why wealth cannot be distributed equally. So that's why this book made the cut in the 10 most important books to read in economics, and it started with number 10. Now let's move to number 9, A General Mathematical Theory of Political Economy by William Stanley Jevons. So, A General Mathematical Theory of Political Economy is a book of economic theory written by British economist and logician William Stanley Jevons, and it was published in 1862. The book, which was initially a paper, argued that economics should use mathematics more extensively and that economists could use mathematical techniques to explain economic activity by deducing from a basic theory of utility. Jevons believed that ordinary language was limited in its ability to express complex relations, and that a true theory of economics would require the use of differential calculus, and he applied the calculus to concepts like wealth, utility, value, demand, supply, capital, interest, and labor. So, Jevons' book is considered a groundbreaking milestone in economic analysis and is often praised as the beginning of the mathematical method in economics. And in the book, Jevons also suggests that exchange can only take place if the utility of the object being exchanged is estimated, and that a balance of utility on both sides will lead to an exchange. And this book is important, and that's why I made the cut, because at the end of the day, for anyone who's studying economics today, it is virtually impossible to be a professional economist, specifically an academic economics, without good command of mathematics. And this book pretty much sets the foundation of mathematical economics in the profession. Today, it is virtually impossible to publish a paper with a professional economic journal unless that paper includes mathematical models. So that's why this book made the cut. Now let's move to number 8, A Theory of the Consumption Function by Milton Friedman. So, A Theory of the Consumption Function is a book of economic theory and statistical analysis written by Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman and published in 1957. In the book, Friedman distinguished between measured income and permanent income, which is a view that considered a longer period of an individual's economic life. He developed the permanent income hypothesis. So the theory suggests that people based their consumption and savings decisions on their expectations of their future income rather than on their current income. The permanent income hypothesis, also known as the PIH, differs from the traditional Keynesian view, which emphasized spending more out of current income. Instead, the PIH suggests that people spend money at a level that's consistent with their expecting long-term average income. Milton Friedman suggested that consumption is usually the same fraction of permanent income regardless of the income's amount, and that the fraction's magnitude depends on many factors such as interest rates and family size. So Friedman's work is still very relevant today to economists and policymakers today, as it helps them understand how consumptions affect the economy on a broader scale. So one thing I gotta say about this book is that it is a heavy read, right? For any student of economics, this book is very mathematical. There's a lot of mathematics and econometrics in the book. So for those who do not have good commands of mathematics, it's going to be challenging to read that book. But the verbal side of the book is very understandable, very clear. Milton Friedman had this great ability to explain things in a very simple way. So beside the mathematics that could be challenging, the rest of the book is quite digestible. And that's why the consumption function made the cut in this list. Now let's move to number 7, Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. So, Human Action is a treatise on economics. It's a book of economic theory written by Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises and published in 1949. This seminal work dissects the complexities of human behavior through the lens of praxeology, the science of human action. In this comprehensive work, Mises deftly argued that all economic phenomena are the results of individual choices, and that the market economy, when left to its own device, functions as a dynamic process driven by human ingenuity and purposeful behavior. By illuminating the intricate interplay between individual decision making and broader economic structures, Mises provides timeless insight that challenge prevailing economic doctrines and champion the cause of individual liberty. Ludwig von Mises, was a huge proponent, a champion of economic, political, and individual freedom. So for anyone eager to explore the profound depths of economic theory and the pivotal role of human choice in shaping our world, obviously Human Action stands as an essential and transformative read. Whether we agree with it or not, Human Action is a 1,000-page book, and it is absolutely essential to read this book to understand that at the end of the day, economics is based on decision making, and decision making deals with human choices. So we cannot, although mathematics plays a quintessential role in understanding economic analysis, decisions at the end of the day remain in the realm of human behavior. We make decisions according to the incentives we have. And that's what Ludwig von Mises is explaining in this book. And this book pretty much tells you that At the end of the day, human beings are the primary unit of social consciousness. So we cannot do economics without including humans, without including psychology, without including the science of decision making. And that's why human action made the cut in this list. Now let's move to number 6, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, is a book of economic theory written by Dr. Thomas Sowell. It was first published in 2000, and since the publication of the first edition, Thomas Sowell expanded the book into 5 editions. The 5th edition, published in 2014, is the most popular and the most comprehensive version to read. That's what everyone has pretty much. It is an introductory book on economics that explains how various economic systems work and how to evaluate them. In the book, Thomas Sowell argued that the basic principles of economics are universal. They operate in feudal, socialist, and capitalist societies, and they apply to all peoples, cultures, and governments. These principles are unchanging. Policies that cause the price of grain to rise in ancient Rome will have the same impact if you implement them in today's India or European Union. Furthermore, Thomas Sowell argued that every economy has to decide how much of each resource to use for which purpose. These decisions, rather than the existence of natural resources, ultimately determine a country's standard of living. Efficient economies maximize output by minimizing waste and getting the most out of scarce resources. Inefficient economies do not. So in his voluminous work, because this book, especially the 5th edition, is almost 800 pages. In this voluminous work, Thomas Sowell explained what an economy is pretty much, right? He defined the concept of scarcity. He talked about the role of prices, the effect of price control on the economy, the importance of profits and losses, the role of government in the economy of big companies, so the economy of scale, and other factors related to the operations of an efficient economy. So this book was essentially written for people who have absolutely no understanding or no idea of how an economy works. So what Thomas Sowell did in this book was to dumb it down. Excuse me for using that word, but it was to dumb it down to so that the average person could have a basic understanding of how the economy works, so that when policymakers make decisions, people are not fooled. So this book is accessible to any person who needs to understand the basics of economics. So that's why this book made the list. Thomas Sowell wrote over 40 books, and that's, to me and to many people, the most impacting, the most important book he wrote in his entire intellectual career. So that's why this book made the cut, and kudos to him for that. Now let's move to number 5, Principles of Economics by Alfred Marshall. So Principles of Economics is a book of economic theory written by British economist and trained physicist Alfred Marshall, and the book was published in 1890. It was his most important contribution to economic literature. In the book, it was distinguished by the introduction of a number of concepts such as elasticity of demand, consumer surplus, quasi-rent, and the representative firm, all of which played a major role in the subsequent development of economics. In this work, Marshall emphasized that the price and output of a good are determined by supply and demand, which act like blades of the scissors in determining prices. This concept has endured modern economists trying to understand changes in the price of a particular good start by looking for factors that may have shifted the demand or the supply curve. So that's why this book called Principles of Economics, because it gives people the fundamental understanding of microeconomics. So this book is important because it establishes microeconomics. Microeconomics deals with markets. It deals with how prices are formed in the market economy. So that's why this book made the cut. It was actually the most important book read in England and in the West at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's why this book made the cut in this list. Now let's move to number 4, The Economics of Welfare by Arthur Cecil Pigou. The Economics of Welfare, it's a voluminous book. It's a 1,000-page book too. It's a really big book. And it's a book of economic theory. It was written by a British economist, Arthur Cecil Pigou, and that book was published in 1920. So the book is based on Alfred Marshall's concept of externalities and argued for government intervention to address those externalities. So Pigou argued that externalities are cost or benefit that are imposed or conferred on others but not considered by the person taking the action. For example, someone who pollutes is creating a negative externality, and Pigou believed that taxes on these activities could discourage them. Furthermore, Pigou argued that government intervention may be necessary to correct market failures caused by externalities. He believed that the existence of negative externalities such as pollution is a sufficient justification for government to interfere. He suggests that this can be accomplished through taxation. So, if there's a negative externality, the person causing that negative externality should be taxed. If there's a positive externality, the person should get a tax credit for it. So in either case, Pigou is saying that government intervention is necessary because externalities exist. Neoclassical economists and Austrian economists vehemently disagree with him, including myself. I disagree with Pigou about his concept of externalities, but this book has impacted public policy, and that's why it made it the list. Because when we look at the way government structure its tax code, it's tax based, and when politicians decide to tax a specific group of people instead of another group of people, when we talk about climate change and people say we need to do something about climate change, we need to impose a tax. This is the economics of welfare. It is the Pigovian theory of externalities. That's why this book made the cut in this list. Although I may not agree with Pigou, but we have to give credit where credit is due. This book is, sure, it is a book of economic theory, but you can directly apply the theory to the practical side of economics with the way the tax system is being enforced on people. Now let's move to number 3, on the principles of political economy and taxation by David Ricardo. So, On the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation is a book of economic theory written by British economist and stockbroker David Ricardo. It was published in 1817. It analyzes the distribution of money in Britain between capitalist landowners and agricultural workers. The book includes Ricardo's commentaries on the political economic writings of Adam Smith, Thomas Robert Malthus, and his own theories on free trade, land, rent, and taxes. So let's talk about a little bit about free trade, land, rent, and taxes. So on free trade, Ricardo argues that free trade can be mutually beneficial between countries, even if one country has an absolute advantage in all areas of production. He highlights the idea that it's better for a country to import a good from another country if it can be obtained at a lower cost. On land rent, Ricardo concludes that land rent increases as population increases, and that landlords will receive a larger share of the national income while capitalists receive less. He also argues that the price of a thing is determined by how difficult it is to make on the least fertile land. And let's now talk about taxation. On taxes, so Ricardo argues that taxes on profit raise prices. That is very important. for people who support, taxing the rich and stuff like that, Ricardo is saying that when you're taxing profit, it raises prices of goods and services. And that if taxes are applied equally, all commodities will increase in prices proportionally. He also argued that taxes on producers will ultimately fall on consumers, as producers will raise the prices to offset the cost of the tax. That's why taxing business owners does not make sense, because when you tax a business owner in making him pay his fair share, all the business owner is going to do is to increase the price of the good or the service that is offering to the market in order to recoup the cost. Otherwise, he's losing. Profit is what determines the financial health of a business. It's simply profit is it's the metric of financial health. When you are making profit, it means that you are financially healthy. You are doing well financially. When you're not making profit, that means you're losing. That means you're in debt. Now you owe. And that's why it's important to understand Ricardo's analysis on taxes. So Ricardo's book is considered a fundamental contribution to the science of economics, and his exact mathematical approach and deductive method influence future texts in the field. Some of his findings, such as the idea that landlords benefit more from productive land than tenant farmers, are still used by economists today. That's why the book of David Ricardo made the cut in this list. Let's move to number 2. It's, of course, the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money by John Maynard Keynes, an economist that I vehemently disagree with. But once again, we gotta give credit where credit is due. So, the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money is a book of economic theory written by British economist and mathematician John Maynard Keynes. And it was published in 1936 in the midst of the Great Depression. So, this book caused a profound shift in economic thought, giving macroeconomics a central place in economic theory. The theories elaborated in this book have been used by governments all across the world to stimulate the national economies. So Ken started the book by offering his critique of classical economic theory. So classical economic theory is simply economic theory developed by people like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, and Thomas Robert Malthus, and so on. So they were the economists of the late 18th century, early 19th century. And they were all in favor of markets. That's why it's called classical economic theory. So Ken made two major arguments on against classical economic theory. The first is that classical economists argue that a worker's wage reflects the value they contribute to a business. They believe that if a company decides not to employ someone, the company's loss is equal to the wage that the worker would have been paid. In other words, they think that a worker's contribution to a company's value is directly tied to their wage. And the second assumption of classical economists, according to Keynes, is that a worker's wage is the lowest amount at which they would be willing to work. This is often seen as an equilibrium point where the demand for labor meets the supply. And in the book, Keynes offered his recipe to how economies can recover from depression and how you can stimulate economies to produce more. And his recipe is very simple: government spending. He believed that government spending is the key driver to stimulate economic growth, to achieve full employment, and to stabilize prices. Keynes suggests that if consumer spending falls, the government can stimulate the economy by increasing spending and the money supply. However, most Keynesians now believe that the government can't fine-tune the economy successfully because of lags between when a policy change is needed and when the government takes action. I think personally that Keynes is wrong, but and the endless empirical evidence backing my point here. But Keynes' book nevertheless made the cut because it has been perhaps the most influential book of economic theory in the 20th century. Of course, there are other books like books by Milton Friedman, such as a history of a monetary history of the United States that challenged the Keynesian view, or even a theory of the consumption function, and even The Road to Serfdom too by Friedrich von Hayek, and even Socialism by Ludwig von Mises. Those books are also very important because they challenge Keynes' view, but Keynes' general theory at the end of the day remains perhaps the most influential book in the entire 20th century, and that's why it made it the cut in this list. Before we move to number one, let me give you the honorary mentions. So there are three books selected for the honorary mentions. The first is Principles of Economics by Karl Menger. So Principles of Economics is a book of economic theory written by Austrian economist Karl Menger and published in 1871. His pioneering book contributed to the development of marginalism, also known as marginal theory, which is an economic theory and method of analysis that suggests that people make economic decisions by weighing the benefits of consuming more of a good or service against the cost of acquiring it. Menger advanced his theory that the marginal utility of goods rather than labor input is the source of their value. This marginalist theory solved the diamond water paradox that had been puzzling classical economists. The fact that mankind find diamonds to be far more valuable than water, although water is far more important. So Menger stressed uncertainty in the making of economic decisions rather than relying on Homo economicus, or the rational man who was fully informed of all circumstances impinging on his decisions. So this was a deviation from classical and neoclassical economic thought. In fact, Principles of Economics by Menger create or gave birth to the Austrian School of Economics. And Menger asserted that such perfect knowledge never exists, and that therefore all economic activity implies risk. The entrepreneur's role was to collect and evaluate information and to act on those risks. So Menger's work is groundbreaking because it introduced the subjective theory of value, also known as the STV. So STV's development helped to better understanding human action and decision making in economics. The theory claims that the value of a good is not determined by an inherent property of the good, nor by the cumulative value of components or labor needed to produce it, but instead is determined by the individuals or entities who are buying that good. So pretty much they find it valuable because that's what they feel about it. So that's why this book is very important, and that's why it was mentioned as it was selected among the honorary mention, because this book is what created an entire school of thought in economics, the Austrian School of Economics. Let's move to the second honorary mention, A Monetary History of the United States by Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz. A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960, is a book of economic analysis and theory co-written by Nobel Prize winning economists Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz. The book was published in 1963, and it uses economic analysis and historical data to argue that the money supply has a significant impact on the US economy. In other words, money is not neutral. The book's main idea is that money matters and that the quantity of money is a controllable force that can greatly influence the economy. The books argue that the money supply can have unintended negative effects and that sound monetary policy is necessary for economic stability. The book is considered a landmark achievement and a benchmark work for monetarism. It reinterprets US monetary history in terms of the relationship between the money supply and the rest of the economy, and uses history to support the modern quantitative theory of money. The book also criticized Keynes' fiscal measures and other attempts to fine tune the economy. The book breaks the period down in various ways, including business cycles, trend periods, and year by year. The authors sometimes consider the sequence of events in period of months or weeks, allowing readers to get to know the pattern of particular years in great details. So that's why this book is absolutely part of the honorary mention. This book is an 800-page book, absolutely fascinating. It was written by Milton Friedman and Arnold Schwartz, and it is important because it tells you that when central banks interfere in the economy, it affects the economy as a whole. In other words, money matters. When the central bank injects or take money out of the economy, it affects prices. So this book also debunked the 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 dominant narrative that the Great Depression was created by capitalism, by unrestrained capitalism. And this book proved that it was in fact government intervention through the central bank that in fact created the Great Depression. The central bank withdrew the amount of money in the economy by a third. So the quantity of money fell by a third. And Milton Friedman was arguing that the central bank should have added more money into the economy in order to avoid the Great Depression. So whether we agree with Milton Friedman or not, this book remains one of the most influential books in the realm of monetary economics. And the number one among the honorary mentions is A History of Economic Analysis by Joseph Schumpeter. So, A History of Economic Analysis is a book of economic history written by Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter. Let me stress here that Schumpeter was Austrian not by the tradition of the Austrian economists. He was actually from Austria. That's why he's an Austrian economist. But he's not an Austrian economist because he was part of the Austrian tradition of the subjective theory of value and so on and so forth. Not at all. Schumpeter was a proud neoclassical economist, and he wanted so bad to be a mathematical economist to earn the respect of his peers. So, A History of Economic Analysis was published in 1954 posthumously. So, Schumpeter died in 1950, and the book was published 4 years after his death. It's a 1,300-page book that studies the development of economic analysis from ancient Greece to 1950. The book covers a wide range of topics, including economic analysis techniques, development in other sciences, the sociology of economics, the writings of Plato and Aristotle, the work of medieval scholastics and natural law philosophers, the major works of European economists including Karl Marx, Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, Malthus, Ricardo, and the history, sociology, psychology, and economics of the period 1879 to 1914 and modern economic development. So some say that the book is lucid and insightful and that it's a major contribution to the history of economics and ideas. Others say that the book can be difficult to follow and that it includes many footnotes and quotation in foreign language that aren't really translated. So the book wasn't finished when Schumpeter died, and then his wife had it edited before it was published in 1954. So this voluminous book deserves to be among the honorary mention because it basically gives a thorough analysis of economic analysis, like a thorough history of economic analysis. It goes in depth about how economics came to being and how it became eventually an academic discipline and why it is important to understand all the techniques used to analyze economic matters. Now that we finished with the honorary mention, let's deal with the number one, the top read in economics. And without surprise, it is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. An inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. That's the full title of the book, The Wealth of Nations. It's a book of economic theory written by Scottish economist and philosopher Adam Smith, and it was published in 1776, which also coincide with the year that the United States became an independent and sovereign nation. In the book, Smith argues that nations will prosper if people are allowed to pursue their own self-interest in a free market without government regulation. He believed that the invisible hand or the force behind the self-interest fulfillment would result in societal benefits. Smith argued pretty much his main ideas include the division of labor, free markets, and laissez-faire capitalism. So let's talk a little bit about the division of labor. So on that note, Smith believed that society's productivity increases when individuals specialize through the division of labor. For example, if 18 workers each perform one step in the process of manufacturing a pin, they can produce thousands of pins in a day instead of one untrained worker producing a few. Smith also believed that people have a natural tendency to exchange goods and specialize because of their different talents. Now let's talk about free market. What Smith says about free market. So he believed that government should let the free market flourish and rejected government interference in market activities. He believed that government's role should be limited to protecting national borders, enforcing civil laws, and public works. Smith also believed that taxes should be raised in proportion to people's ability to pay at set rates and in a way that it is easy to pay. He also believed that government should avoid taxing capital and building up large debt. And on laissez-faire capitalism, Smith described a stage of society that evolves from feudalism and required a new institution, such as free enterprise and market-determined wages. He called this system the system of perfect liberty, which later became known as laissez-faire capitalism. Ladies and gentlemen, that was my list of the 10 most important books to read in economics in order to be well versed. I'm sure some of you will disagree with this list, and if you believe that there is a book that should be incorporated into the list, please leave it in the comment. Thank you guys for watching this episode, and see you guys soon.